Hi, everyone, and welcome to this training, Creating a Practical Digital Advocacy Strategy in a Tough Political Environment. And believe me, if you're on the left or care about the constitutional order, this is indeed a tough political environment. So I know that everyone is likely to be having kind of a rough time right now. I am not having the easiest time of my life either, watching professional lifetimes work get disassembled before my eyes. But it is on us to make the best of this moment and to do what we can do. So with that in mind, we'll go ahead and get rolling here. Let me admit one more person. So let's talk about where we're going, but first, who am I? So I have been in the political world since the early 90s. I have been in the digital politics world for about, oh, geez, more like 28 years now. I'm a strategy consultant working with a variety of nonprofits and political groups. I'm an advocate. Since 2006, I've been running epolitics.com, which is a website and now a Substack. I'm the author of an ebook on digital politics and advocacy, how to use the internet to change the world, which you can see in front of you right there. And I do a lot of different things, digital advertising strategy, ad placement. I'm really, in some ways, almost most valuable at the top level, looking at digital programs as a whole, helping plan out overall digital strategy, email strategy, and list building. And I'm going to be doing a training on list building within the next 6 weeks or so. And then social media strategy and overall digital planning and execution. And as you might guess from the photo to the right, I also play in a kick-ass rock and roll band in Mount Pleasant, DC. So like I mentioned earlier, I got started in Texas politics way back in the early 90s. I stumbled into a job working for a state legislator in Texas. And in Texas, the reason I put this slide up is politics has been played as a contact sport historically, a little bit of a rough game. I have a few beers sometime, I'll tell you some stories, but it has given me a very pragmatic and practical approach to digital advocacy, and I hope that that comes through in our presentation today. So let me just, 1 second. All right. So let's go here. So what is advocacy anyway, right? Well, advocacy is we're trying to change the world. We may be advocating for policies, we may be advocating for people, but we are somehow trying to mobilize sometimes the will of the people, sometimes we're trying to mobilize facts, but we are trying to get something done in the real world. Digital advocacy is we're using digital tools to contribute to that, right? Now, sometimes it is all digital, but as we'll see, far more often it is a combination approach, both digital and real world. And as I'll say, as we go along, it's far more effective when we can combine the digital and the real world. So the thing is, what I'm going to talk about today is based on my experience and what I've learned from a whole lot of other people over the last 30 or 35 years. However, we do not know what things are going to look like in a month, 6 months, or a year. If the Supreme Court adopts an idea called the unitary executive, basically there may not be traditional legislative advocacy at the national level like we are used to. If the president can functionally usurp the control that the legislative branch has had over the bureaucracy, and I have a sneaking suspicion that's going to happen, we are really going to have to reimagine what advocacy looks like. So I just want to get that out there and kind of frame it for folks because I don't want to overpromise. We will just see where this goes. And at ePolitics, I plan to be covering that and covering the changing landscape and trying to find ways that we can actually make a difference in this world. So just for an overview of advocacy, my friends over at the Campaign Workshop put together this very, very useful infographic. It's a little dense, maybe a little hard to read, but we're talking, I'm going to go ahead and walk through each of these different ideas, reframe slightly, but you get the general point here. So the essentials for advocacy are your goals, your capabilities, an understanding of the landscape and the other players, your targets, and then finally, after we're through all of that, do we get down to strategy and tactics. So goals, capabilities, players, targets, tactics. And then with the players, that also includes the field you're playing on. So rule of thumb, I know this is a tough one here. You've probably never heard this before in your life, but know your goals, right? If you don't know where you're going, it can be awfully hard to get there. And the typical goals here, long-term agenda setting, short-term policy opportunity or threat, recruiting, fundraising, supporter mobilization. If we were doing a live session, I would ask you guys what are some other goals that your particular organization might have if we were able to go back and forth. But perhaps you guys could put some of those in the chat and we can all take a look at them. But it's very important to just sit down and understand, what are we ultimately trying to do? Are we trying to pass bills? Are we trying to, help our constituents and, whatever group that we're providing services to? Are we reacting to a short-term policy opportunity? Things can pop up very quickly. Or these days, reacting to a short-term policy threat. Recruiting, very common, because a big part of our job in the digital politics world is to build lists. It's to go out, meet people where they are, persuade them to come on board our campaign, and then mobilize them to take action. And of course, fundraising. Now, fundraising can be a little tricky. Sometimes people think that the internet is a cash machine and you just insert your email list and money pops out. But it's really a much longer term form of engagement than that. You have to build people. You have to have a very large list if you're going to do grassroots fundraising. So it takes unless you can catch lightning in a bottle. The beginning of the first Trump administration, the ACLU brought in tens of millions of dollars basically over the course of a weekend and a week because celebrities and other influencers took offense at Donald Trump's Muslim travel ban, and jumped on the ACLU's website and started giving money, and the influence started telling everyone they knew, putting it out there on Instagram back then, TikTok now, trying to drum up support. But most of the time, it is more of a long, ongoing campaign. And as I mentioned in the introduction to this, I'm going to be doing a training on digital fundraising down the road. So after this is over, I'll send links to where you can keep track of upcoming events. And then supporter mobilization. This is where we have gotten our list together. We have our people, we have our folks on Facebook, on Instagram, and now we need to get them doing something. So then we would need to, as an organization, be ready to do that. So another rule of thumb is know thyself, right? What are you good at? What are you bad at? This is the classic SWOT, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis, right? For instance, I worked at the National Women's Law Center for several years, and they were a policy-focused organization. They were not really a grassroots organization. And so they were very good at detailed policy analyses, but we simply did not have the grassroots list that would let us, reach out to 500,000 people or 1 million people or mobilize folks. But what they were good, as I said, was policy, and they had allies. They were parts of coalitions. So the policy analysts at NWLC could take apart a proposed piece of legislation or a proposed rule change and let you know exactly what the implications were. But and then they could pass that on to their allies, who could then make hay out of it and start to mobilize their own grassroots. Similarly, you might be a grassroots organization that really doesn't have much in the way of policy analysis or much in the way of media outreach or much in the way of budget potentially. But if you can team up with groups that do have access to those things, they can amplify your work, they can provide material for you. These are examples of just knowing what is out there, but also know who are the enemies, right? Who is up against you? What are their capabilities? What can you expect them to do so that you can counter their work live? So again, I know this is going to come as a complete shock, but you are going to want to base the tools and tactics you choose on your goals, targets, and capabilities. And the reason I, mention this explicitly is that very often, and perhaps a little less so now, but for years upon years, organizations would sometimes do things simply because the executive director's nephew said it was a good idea, right? There's the shiny object syndrome. We have to be on TikTok as an organization because TikTok is where things happen. But that may not understand what your organization is good at. And it also may not understand what actually works on, for instance, TikTok, right? I don't know a ton of organizational accounts that are doing as well, but on TikTok. But if you can enlist people who are on TikTok and get them working for you, then you can start to leverage the tool itself. So if you don't produce video, don't adopt a strategy that's video focused. If you don't produce or can leverage. Likewise, if you don't have grassroots support, don't adopt a grassroots strategy unless you're going to invest the time and resources into building it. So to me, the hardest part of advocacy right now is choosing your targets, right? Traditional congressional advocacy is simply up in the air right now. Republicans are unreachable. They're listening only to their hardest base and to Donald Trump and Elon Musk. Democrats are overwhelmed and one might say a little confused about what they should be doing right now. So many of us have the powerful urge to go scream at our Congress members, but if they're not in a position of power, what can they actually do? Well, lead is a good start, but what does leading look like in that case? Now, if you were working at the state and local level, your targets may be more open and more obvious, right? And I would add at the federal level, traditionally folks would, work on rulemaking at the federal agencies. We don't know if we're going to have federal agencies. So again, this position is in flux. So then who's open to persuasion? Again, state and local, you may be able to reach your legislators, city council members, corporate targeting in some cases. Corporations historically have been far more, shall we say, reluctant to get beat up on in public than Congress members or state legislators. Congress members are, used to winning by 4 or 5 points, right? They know they're not going to get 100% of the electorate. If you're in a safe district, losing 3 or 4 points of support might not matter in the slightest. But a corporation losing, a couple of percent, 3% of their customer base might make a difference. So finding who is vulnerable to pressure, what are their pressure points, and then of course, going forward, we have to wonder what the heck we can do. So sorry to be, kind of a buzzkill, but I want to be as realistic as I can in the current environment. So digital advocacy. So what does effective online advocacy look like, right? It can look like a lot of things, and we'll see some examples going forward. But at heart, to me, it's based on relationships, content, and then it generally features amplification and integration. And when I say relationships, I mean everything from your relationships with your partner organizations or to your funders, to relationships with your grassroots supporters, to relationships with journalists, bloggers, Substackers, and everyone else who is out there these days that could be, influencing the online discussion. And it's that we often don't really think about it in terms of in terms of relationships that way. But one thing that the internet really excels at is maintaining relationships with a large number of people all at once. If you're running an email list or you're running a Facebook page, you are basically managing relationships at a very large scale. And every contact that someone has with you, whether it's an email or a text or a Facebook post or an Instagram post or a YouTube video, that all affects their likelihood of taking action on your behalf, whatever that action is. If you're running for office, that's probably voting for you or donating. If you're a nonprofit, it might be donating or calling Congress or emailing comments into a federal rulemaking. Nurturing these long-term relationships is extremely important, and that's why what they call churn and burn fundraising can really hurt an organization in the long term, where you get a list, abuse that list, i.e. email too often without providing any value to them, and you can poison relationships pretty quickly at a large scale. But the second piece is content. And the cute little picture to the right there illustrates relationships and content simultaneously. Content can be many, many, many different forms, right? We're talking video, images, text, anything that you are using to try to change people's minds or motivate them to act. And we're going to talk a good bit about what makes content effective down the road. But the relationships and the content kind of go together, because without the relationships, it's kind of hard to share the content. Without the content, it's kind of hard to turn those relationships into something that's concrete and meaningful and can lead to action in the real world, right? And then the next piece is amplification. Oh, by the way, if you have questions, drop them in the chat and I will check them periodically as we go. So again, the internet, it excels at maintaining relationships at a large scale, but it can also be good at taking a single thing and turning it into a lot of things. I'll give you an example. Say 25 years ago, an organization might have spent, hours upon maybe hundreds of hours of staff time on a white paper, and they would mail it to the Hill or fax it to some reporters, and then that was kind of about it, right? Put it on the website if websites had already been invented. But there wasn't, it was kind of a one and done thing, right? But now, you can take the work that went into that white paper, turn it into 25 tweets or blue sky posts, turn it into Facebook content, obviously pitch it out to reporters, make your issue experts available for podcast interviews, shoot short videos of your issue experts talking about the issue and post those to TikTok, post those to YouTube, post those to Instagram. One piece of content can turn into 20 or 30 or 40 different sort of contact points for current and potential supporters and other people that you might be trying to influence. So that I cannot overstate the importance of that amplification. It drives me crazy to see advocacy organizations put a ton of work into a good piece of content and then not do enough to spread the word about it. And that sort of ties into the next aspect, which to me is integration. All of the entire advocacy process works much better when the pieces reinforce each other and create that virtuous circle, right? Now, again, this should be communications 101, but so often in the political world, in the advocacy world, even in the political campaign world, these different components can be siloed off from each other. So thinking about how the pieces integrate, I think can help you get more out of every single piece that you do, right? Now, I know every single one of you is an enormous Rand Paul fan, but I want to, whoops, let me go back here. I want to highlight the context of this. It was when they were renewing the USA Patriot Act, the Orwellianly named USA Patriot Act back, I believe, about 2014 or so. And Rand Paul, at the time a classic civil libertarian, or at least portrayed himself as such, he was filibustering on the Senate floor. Now, besides filibustering, he was, his surrogates were going out on cable TV. His campaign, or his office, and probably his campaign too, were posting content online. They were posting videos. They were, basically getting in front of as many eyeballs as they could, and then directing people back to his website. And when you landed on his website, of course, this was a splash screen that you would see. Now, what do you think happened if you entered your name, zip, email address, and clicked Stand with Rand, right? You would, of course, end up on his email list. Nowadays, they'd probably get your cell phone number and put you on the text list. And then from there, you're going to be getting directed to the Facebook page to follow him there. You're going to get directed to the Twitter account to follow him there. So something that started in the real world got amplified online, on television, and in any other coverage that was out there. And then it funneled back here to convert people to, a list for online fundraising and online activists. Or someone says, or on a watch list, since this is the NSA we're talking about. Yes, one never knows out there. Now, for a, and I'm gonna, one important thing here is this idea of the real world, right? So the more that we can support, that the digital work can support action in the real world, I think the more powerful it can be. Here is an Obama, here's a blast from the past, Barack Obama field team from back in 2007 or 2008. Now, how does digital work with field? Well, if you have an email list or a text list, that might be the source of your volunteers or your field organizers, right? You can also take, if you're going to be canvassing a particular group of targets, a particular group of people, you can take your target list, upload it to Facebook or another digital ad platform, and target the people that, if you're going to knock doors for 2 or 3 days beforehand, you could reach those people with advertising to lay the groundwork. Basically to try to make it so that when your people come to the door, they don't get run off right away, right? That people might be open. And also that you're softening the ground for persuasion and recruiting. So here, digital helping a real world action happen. And again, connect it to the real. I'm jumping ahead just a little bit. Right now, watching Indivisible, I think, is one, basically, if you're looking for examples of using digital tools to spark real world action, Indivisible is a very good place to look. They held this Zoom call that I'm featuring on the screen here on a Sunday. By the next day, they already had hundreds or thousands of people calling congressional offices, protests getting organized around the country, people visiting congressional district offices. Whether that's going to make the slightest difference in the long run, I don't know. But they were able to take people's online enthusiasm and channel it toward real world action. So a typical structure of a digital campaign, right? Well, why don't we take a pause there for just 1 second and let me take a look at the chat here, because I think we've had a couple of good questions. 1 second. Oh, that's very interesting. Can you share any differences in how you see amplification from a grassroots native perspective versus paid ads? From Chloe. That is an excellent question, Chloe. I would say paid ads, can be powerful in their ability to target people, right? We're going to talk about targeting toward the end of the presentation. But the thing is that it's just an ad, right? And we're very used to ignoring advertising. We have built up powerful countermeasures against advertising. I think advertising is, advertising during the presidential election year last year helped pay my mortgage. And I do think it can be powerful, but it is going to run against natural limits. amplification from a grassroots point of view, that is more your peer-to-peer, person-to-person supporter to all their friends. And right now, as an individual citizen, the most important thing you can do, I think, if you're trying to push back against Trump, is to talk to everyone you know personally, whether that's face-to-face, whether that's online, whether that's Zoom calls, phone calls, whatever it is, text messages, but letting people know what is happening and that that things are happening, because I think so many people are barely even aware of it, right? So let's get back to the questions, or I'm sorry, back to the presentation here. So the typical structure of an online advocacy campaign, right? You're usually going to have some kind of online hub, whether it's a website, a Facebook page, a TikTok profile, a Substack, whatever it is. It's someplace that you can direct people, and also, where they can, like, for instance, if you go to a political campaign website or a nonprofit website, you're going to find ways to, get converted to their email list, their text lists, their donor list if they're lucky. The other thing it does is it's a place to collect all of your content. Your videos, sure, they're on Instagram and LinkedIn, or on YouTube and Facebook, but you want to have the archive, the central repository on your website, or whatever you're using as the hub. So your outreach reaches out from that. It pushes people back to the hub to take action. And at least historically, having that content on your website was a good way to get attention from Google. However, with the rise of AI chat, I'm not, now the popular chat search tools are now at least linking back to the sources of their content. But a year ago, that was not as true. And I was not entirely sure that political and advocacy websites were going to be that, nearly as effective in the future. So now, besides search engine optimization, you have to think about AI optimization. So I have heard of groups that are putting more effort into trying to get their content into Wikipedia, since the AIs draw so much from Wikipedia, right? But regardless, we're typically still going to be on a website or a surrogate. Then the second piece is your ongoing communications with your supporters: email, social media, text message. That's pretty self-explanatory. The third component is your outreach. How are you getting out in front of folks? Whether that's going on someone's podcast, running advertising, getting a partner organization to send out a recruiting email on your behalf. Be surprised at how often that happens. But it is your way, and also it's your way of influencing the conversation, right? This is talking with bloggers or Substackers or reporters behind the scenes via DM. DMs have gone from a little more obscure to being a pretty powerful, channel to reach influencers and energizers. But so these are the three, you sort of have your hub and then your different spokes. And then again, whenever possible, you need to connect it back to the real world. So I want to go into some detail on just some different aspects right now. To me, nothing is more powerful than one person talking to another person or a small group of people that they trust, who trust them. So the more that you can spark these direct communications, encouraging your supporters to do it by text or email or Facebook posts, providing them the tools to do it, right? Many advocacy platforms have peer-to-peer tools baked in, right? You can, go to a toolbox and, email your Congress member and that kind of thing. But you can also look at sources, talking points, links that you can share with friends. This kind of personal advocacy in the ridiculously cluttered media environment that we are in right now, I really do think that is one of the few things that is going to break through the clutter, right? So I think the more that we can be focusing on trying to get these person-to-person conversations going, the more chance that our messages have a chance to break through. So the second thing I want to highlight is meeting people where they are. Now, I was at an event called Roots Camp last weekend, and this is, it's a gathering of progressive digital folks. I would, one of the things that we talked about a lot was the fact that the traditional ways of reaching the voters, the traditional ways of reaching advocates are simply getting drowned out these days. People are getting their news from TikTok and Facebook. Not all of them. And many of the people who are getting, who are sharing information are sharing, links to stories from mainstream media. But more often, more and more often, we are getting our information filtered through podcasts. I include Twitch streamers there. Twitch is, if you don't know that much about it, it is an arena for live streaming, particularly video games, right? So you're playing a game and you're streaming your gaming session, and of course you get people who have big followings there. The discussion I saw on election night 2024, quite a few Twitch streamers live streamed the election results as they were coming in. Of the top 10 streamers, 9 of them were pro-Trump, and the other one was not pro-Harris. So 10 of 10 were not pro-Democratic. 9 of 10 were pro-Trump. So this is a good example of how people on the left are simply missing huge territories where the conversation is happening. There's a Bloomberg article, I think it's paywalled, but you might be able to get a link to it. There was a Bloomberg article from a couple of weeks ago looking at young men and podcasting and the election. And again, vast majority of the people that they were listening to were pro-Trump, not pro-Harris. So to me, if the left does not get its act together and start recruiting people, you're not going to, as an organization, start a Twitch stream, but you can. There are plenty of gamers out there who are on your side, right? Who are at least passively supportive of the goals of equality and opportunity that we're in for. Can you find a way to reach them and mobilize them, right? Similarly, reaching out to people who, active on TikTok, Blue Sky, the Twitter alternative that has taken off, particularly on the left in the last couple of months. That's where a lot of conversation is happening right now. But also Substack. Substack's becoming kind of that everywhere app where it's has a little bit of a microblogging component like Blue Sky or Twitter, but it's really designed for long form content. I've been on Substack, got established the account last summer, but really started using it in earnest, in the current environment. And the opportunity for people to find you there can be pretty powerful. You see folks, some accounts blow up overnight, but millions of Americans are still on Facebook, right? We're not going to be ignoring these legacy channels simply because they're getting eclipsed in the media attention by, things like TikTok or Blue Sky. So, but meet the people where they are and use the language that they use. Some people may not like what I'm about to say, but the word Latinx has turned off a whole lot of people in the Latin community. There was a study last, I think it was in the fall, and I believe it was looking at Latinos who were either supporting Trump or had switched from supporting Biden to supporting the Republicans. And a noticeable percentage of them specifically pointed to the word Latinx as one reason that they were changing. It's not how people in their communities talked. They found it profoundly alienating. And it's, an example of, as Carville says, the faculty lounge taking over the political discourse. So use the language people use. If you're on a gaming site, use the language that gamers use. And this, again, is why you want to be recruiting natives to those platforms, not trying to go out there and act like you're a part of the community when you're not. So I know this is sobering. It is also a lot of work. So I think it's a question of, tapping into the resources you have, your allies, but also your own supporters. asking them what platforms they use, asking them where they can be active as advocates. You can do that using surveys, for example. You can use it or do that by, dangling opportunities for them to take action, joining in Zoom calls, and then asking them to sign up for an outreach list after that. So I cannot emphasize too much. Putting out a press release and hoping it shows up in the New York Times is not gonna cut it these days. We got to be out where people are. And advertising can help with that, right? Programmatic advertising, if you're not familiar with it, it reaches people across a vast array of different online properties. Streaming TV, in the last election cycle, streaming TV really blew up as a campaign tool, partly because I think the traditional TV consultants can wrap their head around it, right? But also because that is where so many of us are these days. But of course, Facebook advertising, which includes Instagram, another good way to get out in front of people. So it is partly organic and it is potentially partly paid. And it's on us to get people talking about the things that we care about. And just a quick reminder, if you have questions or comments, drop them in the chat. So recruiting people to speak on your behalf, right? It doesn't always have to be some top line podcaster, right? It can be somebody relatively local. Here are a couple of examples that we used in a presentation I did with another organization several years ago, but I think they're a good example of taking a local voice and then using a Facebook ad to amplify that voice, right? So that you're helping get the word out, but it's their words. So these are people, these were sort of local influencers that Latino Victory was amplifying out to their own communities, right? And now, how do you get people to do this? If you're embedded in the community, ask people who they listen to, right? If you're, you can, that is a very, like I said, surveys. But if you're out, on the ground, find out who folks listen to, right? But if you're looking at a more national level or regional or in some kind of niche interest group, look at the folks that are the most popular. Look at the folks who you might have a chance to get in with, but then reach out and contact them directly, right? This is, again, direct message time. The problem with this, of course, just like traditional media relations, it is time intensive, right? It does not have to take a whole lot of money, but it typically takes a lot of time. You have to do the research. You have to potentially reach out to a lot of people, right? But as I mentioned earlier, a message coming from a trusted messenger is far more likely to cut through the clutter than is a message coming from a stranger or a random advertisement on the screen. And again, this is, I think, one reason that Trump has had such success with young men, is that the men that Trump, the men, largely men, that these young men listened to were on Trump's side. And again, as someone pointed out at Roots Camp, 10 years ago, many of them were not. Joe Rogan, if I remember right, was a Bernie bro back in the day, right? So we have lost these people, and we may help lose the country because of it. So find the influencers, connect with them, get them speaking on your behalf. And again, if you've got questions or comments, let's go to the chat there. All right. So another thing, and to me right now, it other than person to person, this is the most important idea I could get across. That photo there is the woman who is the first verified person to die because of USAID defunding, right? She was discharged from a hospital because the funding was cut. She lost access to oxygen and she died. Now, many Americans, unfortunately, are not going to care about her, right? But if the Republicans come after Medicaid, half of Medicaid goes toward keeping older people in America in nursing homes. My father was in a nursing home for a couple of years before he died in December. And I believe out of the 150 or 200 people in the facility, he was one of two that had long-term care insurance. Everyone else was spending their money down to zero and then going on Medicaid, right? So when it comes to government, the funding cut down, shutdowns, most Americans too, many Americans are not going to be terribly sympathetic to government contractors. They may be more sympathetic to small businesses. I was talking to a friend yesterday who knows someone who lost a USAID contract, is going to have to shut down her business and move back in with her parents, right? That is destroying a small business. Can you make it visceral? Can you make it real, right? The sort of talking about programs in the abstract, like Democratic office holders love to do, is simply not going to work. We have to show, not tell. So content, where does content come from, right? Well, a lot of times, we're writing the words, we're doing the work ourselves, but the AI potentially let us do more with less. I know a lot of people have concerns about AI, but I want to point to a tool. There's one out there called Quiller.ai, quill like a quill pen. There are a couple of more, I believe Advocacy AI. I could be getting it mixed up. I don't want to lie to you guys, but there are a couple of good tools out there. My friend Alan Rosenblatt is involved with one. That you can basically use them to generate 4 or 5 Facebook posts or 4 or 5 fundraising emails in the time that it used to take you to get your first draft out. Now, this is not replacing human work. It's letting people do more with less, right? Things like spreadsheet manipulation. It's another area where AI can help out potentially. Of course, if you're using a public AI platform, you are potentially going to run into trouble that your information can be used by the AI then, right? With the specialized platforms designed for advocacy, they're generally not going to be allowing that. So again, I know folks have concerns about AI, but it is something that could let you get a lot more done on a limited budget and in a short period of time. So let's talk about another aspect, and this is the grassroots and the grass tops, right? And sometimes we think about these things in, do we have a grassroots strategy or do we have a grass tops strategy? And in some ways, an influencer strategy is a grass top strategy. But to me, the two, are going to work best when they're working together. When you're mobilizing people on the ground, calling their Congress members, boycotting corporations, showing up to support your local community. And I just noticed that I misspelled grassroots. That's on me. That's called editing error. But at the same time, we can be looking for grass top support in places we may not be thinking about. This is these are a couple of ads from a campaign I worked on years ago for Environmental Defense Fund, where we were using Facebook ads, highly targeted, to try to recruit people that Republican office holders might listen to around climate change. So in Carolina, it was farmers who might want solar energy on their land. In, whoops, let me admit someone here. In New Hampshire, it was business owners and local Republican county chairs or other basically reachable Republican local officials. In Miami Beach there, it was business owners who were affected by flooding. And so people who liked or commented or responded, we actually had a field team that was going to reach out to them directly. So you can use sort of what we think of as grassroots tools to try to recruit the grass tops. It's basically, again, trying to find that pressure point. What is your target? Who is your target going to listen to? What will give us a chance to break through the clutter? And then we might also, something that Democrats in particular are terrible at, honestly, is long-term persuasion, particularly long-term persuasion advertising. We're great at reacting in the moment. We're great at, running GOTV campaigns, get out the vote campaigns at the last minute. We're not, as a movement, as good at the sort of long-term communications. You can look up the idea of deep canvassing, for instance. canvassing, having persistent field organizing in an area for months or years on end to try to find people who are open to persuasion, to work on them, and to get them persuading the other people in their lives. So, I have some ideas on how to do that. As we looked at with field organizing, this is an example where advertising can help lay the groundwork for peer-to-peer or person-to-person connections. But I think it is something we have sadly neglected and something that the Republicans are capitalizing on as we speak. And if we're going to get out of the mess that we're slipping into, we're going to have to do a whole lot of persuading, and not just tomorrow. I mean, for many, many years to come. So let's look at the tools real quick. I mean, this is much more of a strategy discussion than a tools discussion. But your website, typically your persuasion and your recruiting hub. Online petitions, they still have their place. Some people make fun of them, but they are good for getting the word out, for recruiting, and for giving your folks something to do, right? It's an engagement tool as well. Email, sustained contact and mobilization and fundraising. Email is not going away. It is still, the most mass reliable tool for this kind of communication. Texting, in the moment mobilization and fundraising. It's harder to run, it's harder to send long content, although you can send links to videos, for instance, via text. It tends to be better for getting people to take an action right away. So your email and your social media are, feeding them and keeping them engaged long term. The texting gets them to act in the moment. Your CRM, this is Action Network, Every Action, Constant Contact, whatever you're using, that it keeps track of people, automates the subscribe and unsubscribe, and it's how you send, mass emails. And you don't want to be emailing, bulk emailing people from Outlook on your desktop. That's a good way to land in spam jail. So the CRMs, the companies that we would use in the advocacy space, spend a lot of time working to make sure that their messages actually get past the spam filters and land. Social media, we've talked a lot about. Persuasion, recruiting, outreach, and then of course, sustained contact with your own supporters. Advertising for persuasion, recruiting, and GOTV. That petition that you put up would be a good way potentially to recruit new folks, but also find people on your own list who are interested in a particular topic. GOTV, get out the vote. Direct contact, as we've talked about, with journalists, bloggers, and influencers. And then, of course, grassroots organizing tools. Everything from peer-to-peer texting to the minivan, to tools from people like Mobilize. But this is how your local activists organize themselves. So let's keep moving here. We are almost done. Targeting, we target a lot of our outreach, particularly advertising. But if you're doing influencer outreach, you can also be targeting by channel, by TikToks around a particular topic, for instance, or a particular media channel. You have geo-targeting, interest targeting on things like Facebook, demographic. You can upload lists. I was just uploading voter file exports earlier today for someone, uploading them into Facebook for targeting of ads for someone running for office in Prince George's County, Maryland. And the targeting based on behavior, actions that people take online. If people click on a piece of content on Facebook, that can become a targetable audience. If people land on your webpage and you have a Facebook pixel installed, those people can become a targetable audience. So I'm happy to talk more about this offline, but I just wanted to give a basic overview. Now here we get to the question of one of my favorites, the illusion of ubiquity. That's the Texas Capitol where I worked in my distant misspent youth. State legislators, are a little, less likely to be bombarded than Congress members. So, sometimes, or very often, as I mentioned earlier, the more locally you can work, often the more you can get done. But one thing that is particularly effective from an advocacy point of view is using targeting to make them feel like your issue is everything they're talking about, right? And that can be online ads, like the Planned Parenthood ad I have up there in the upper left. That ran on the Washington Post. They did a homepage takeover and basically took up just about every ad slot on the front page of the Washington Post, trying to hit DC influencers, basically. But it can also be phone calls and emails from those legislators' constituents. It can be ads on Facebook targeted at employees of, in this case, the Texas State Legislature, or targeting the zip codes of state agencies or federal agencies, again, if those still exist. And then it can also, as we've mentioned, tie into real world action, like the ACLU billboard truck down there at the bottom, or your legion of citizen activists who are gathered outside the legislature. So you want to make it seem that even if you are a small campaign with limited resources, using careful targeting and sort of creative content and creative engagement, trying to make your targets feel like that everyone is talking about this and that they need to be listening to it. So this is me, epolitics.com. You can also find me now on Substack. And like I said, I will be sending around a link to all of those. And Noel here says, miss those specific targeting options. Yes, Facebook has taken away a whole lot of interest targeting that we used to have. I used to, include people who liked The Daily Show and exclude people who liked the Fox News, but you can no longer do things like that. You have to find proxies. Now, is there a goal? We have a question from Noel. Is there a good cold email template to use in reaching out to these local influencers? That's a good question. I haven't seen one. I haven't really thought about a templated approach. I think the more personal you make it, the better. It makes me think of online dating, right? You're supposed to look up the person's profile and carefully craft a message intended for that person. And I think it could be kind of similar with this, that you want to find the channels, if they're on Substack, message them through Substack. If they're on TikTok, message them through TikTok. Now, Taylor has a question. As digital strategists, how do we prepare our strategies and tactics for big tech oligarchs working against us if we don't have huge capacity budgets? Just stop worrying about social and focus on email. Well, again, social is where so many of the people are, right? So I think it comes down to mobilizing your supporters to be working on Facebook, right? Have them be your surrogates, even if you don't have the budget. So can you provide content? Can you, send texts to spark them to action? Can you send links, to their, include links and texts? And we have Peter here says, voter file targeting is a good alternative to fans of affinities that are being taken away. That's true. And then social and podcasts in key areas, such as vulnerable GOP districts, right? There's great suggestions, right? So, here's things that I'm doing now, right? Zuckerberg and his friends don't want us sharing links to content, so they actually tend to penalize Facebook posts, tweets, that even potentially LinkedIn posts that include links. So what folks are doing now is putting text in the message and putting the link in the comment, trying to get around that sort of restriction. None of this is magic. All of this takes creativity and a lot of work. So are there any other questions right now? Is there anything we can help with? Okay. Well, I just want to thank all of y'all for taking time from what is obviously, very busy work and personal lives right now. I hope you can all try to take a deep breath sometime. I know this can be very demoralizing. I have to hope that our work has meaning and has the chance to change things in the world. And I think that all we can do is work for the world that we want to live in and we want our children and grandchildren to live in. So thank you again, and I'll see you at the next training, which is next week on rapid response. Thank you.